Watch Talk Heathen live Sundays at 1 p.m. Central. Visit tiny.cc/YTTH and call into the show at 512-991-9242 or connect to the show online at tiny.cc/callth.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another fantastic episode of Truth Wanted. I am your host tonight, Objectively Dan, and this is the call-in show where we talk to you about what you believe and why, live every single week, Fridays at 7 p.m. Central Time. Joining me is a special guest, as usual. This week's special guest is Drew Bekius. Drew, welcome to Truth Wanted.
Hey, thanks so much for having me, Objectively Dan. It is objectively great to be here.
Oh, it's fantastic. You were not the first person to make a joke about my name, Drew, and you will not be the last. So kudos to you for
This was not a
giving
joke,
me that.
though. It was in utmost sincerity.
Oh, okay. Well, all right. Well, that makes me feel a little better then. All right. Well, thank you for that. Again, this is Truth Wanted. This is a live call-in show. So we want to talk to you guys, and you want to talk to us for sure. So if you're interested in doing that, please call into the number below on the screen. It's 512-991-9242, or you can visit tiny.cc/calltw. And if you're listening to a recording of this show, hey, come check this out live. Again, it's on Fridays at 7 p.m. Central, where I'd love to talk to you and have you talk to our special guests as well. So this week, of course, is Drew Bekius. Drew, you are an author, you are a coach, you are a former evangelical pastor, and you went to Moody Bible College. And what I keep bringing up Moody. I know we were talking a lot about Moody Bible College before this show, because there's something about Moody. Moody Christians are different. I don't know what it is, but the vibe is different. And now you are a humanist, and you talk about humanism, and you've written about it. So that's quite a bit of a difference, being a humanist to evangelical preacher. Well, really the other way around. So I'd love if you could just tell us your story, Drew. How did you start off? What was your background like? And let's just go from there.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's do it. So I suppose the quick, 30,000 foot view, grew up very much your typical evangelical Midwesterner for the most part. A little bit of some more fundamentalist influences, but for the most part, just your kind of cotton candy, typical everything's great, praise God, Christian. In high school, though, when I was 16 years old, I was kind of serious, way too serious as a high schooler, really. Had to make up for it later in life. But started my first ministry when I was 16 years old. Took it very seriously. Started preaching when I was 17 years old, preaching Sunday mornings to the church. Started when the Billy Graham Crusade came to the great city of Minneapolis circa 1997-ish. I helped staff that event for Billy Graham as a 17-year-old.
Wow.
So a variety of these things, camp counselor in high school, all the leading See You at the Pole rallies, if anyone remembers those. I don't even know if they're still around anymore. Probably are, unfortunately. But and then from there, jumped from that right after high school, packed up everything I owned, went to the great city of Chicago, attending, of course, the Moody Bible Institute, as you already mentioned. Did both my BA there as well as an MDiv. So was there for a total of 10 years. Interesting little side comment we might want to circle back to later. Is there notable differences between grad school and undergrad? Graduate school is a bit more progressive, at least in terms of methodology, if not theology. But anyway, we can come back to that later.
That I do want to go back to that later. So yeah,
it was. I mean, you mentioned earlier how I mentioned Barack Obama in my book, and that was under the influence of Moody grad school profs. So
just to give context, you were on your website you have the introduction to one of your books, and also part of the first chapter, and you talked about how at the time you endorsed the candidacy for Barack Obama, while you were at Moody Bible Institute, and I was like, "That shut up, that's not real. I can't believe that anybody from fucking the, like, for people who don't know, right? So like in the United States, we have a lot of sort of obviously private colleges, but specifically Christian colleges, and there's even a smaller subset of that of evangelical Christian colleges, and Moody is like one of the premier like evangelical colleges from like if you had a guest speaker from Moody at your church, like that was like a big deal. There was people because that was like where you could get the higher learning. That's where you can get the real biblical criticisms and all kinds of stuff going from. Yeah, exactly. So
the manna from
obviously,
heaven. Yeah,
exactly. So obviously, it being an evangelical institution, there's an assumption about your political leanings there, and it tends to be conservative. And then you're saying that you actually voted for Obama, or at least endorsed his candidacy. That's weird to me. That's so strange. You'd be the first person from that institute I know of that would have that views, but maybe I've never been, so I don't know. Maybe there's more. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's good stuff. It's good stuff. Yeah, and and that was also while I was a pastor. So I was an evangelical pastor. But by the time with my first church, I was a little bit more just typical evangelical. But then as I'm going through and getting my MDiv and am being drawn a little bit more towards what was called back then, here's another twister for you: the evangelical left. The evangelical left was a thing back in the days.
Is it still a thing, Drew?
I don't know that it is. I haven't heard about it in a long time. I don't know that it is, but back then there was this thing. Yeah,
that's wild. That's so wild.
I'd like there to be. I'd like
there to be too. I think, man, we're just so different from the Bush era. You know what I mean? The world's changed. I don't know. I will say this too, Drew.
We need it.
You started when you were 16 years old. Now, no offense to you, I'm sure you were a great speaker. There isn't a 16-year-old on earth that I would listen to for like an hour at a church. Like I don't think
it's terrible.
No,
it was.
I don't think
it was brutal.
Was it bad? It wasn't good.
Yeah.
Well, why did they let you do it if you could? I mean, like, were they just happy that you were just young enough and were interested? I mean, you must have had some talent.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a lot of what. I guess I don't know. I mean, I guess it's all debatable, or it's not objective, right? It's all subjective. It's all relative, whatever.
I guess so.
But no, I mean, I think it's also something like when you've got, like, you see those videos on YouTube of, you've got, like those more Pentecostal churches, and you've got like the little kids up in the front, like preaching spontaneously, and the whole crowd, they love it. And I think a lot of that is because there's this idea of it's these young children who the Lord has called them at a young age, and the Lord will lead them. And so it's like a mark of the Holy Spirit among you. And so it doesn't matter in terms of raw skill, God will lead the way. And that's why they let you do it. I think early.
Yeah, I think there's a point there too, because there's also a narrative, especially in evangelical spaces, that it's the youth are becoming more corrupt. I mean, that's with every generation of everywhere, right? But especially in evangelical spaces where it's like they're wicked, and by the time you get to college, you need to make sure you're still going to church and stuff like that. So I knew where I grew up, like there was a big emphasis on that, whereas like you still need to be a part of a community. You need to like connect with other Christians wherever you go. Because I went to a public,
because if your kid's not saved,
and that can be seen
if
as
your kid's not saved by the time they go to college, then they're hellbound for the rest of their lives. So you got to win those souls, statistically speaking, right?
right. So that's a pretty radical background for a lot of people, I would say, right? Like you were deep in the paint, as I like to say. So you're going to you're going to Moody, and you're learning some knowledge. You're talking to lots of people. So like, tell me about that experience. Like, was that informative? Because we were talking a little bit before the show too. You were part of this sort of progressive Christian, maybe progressive evangelical wing for a bit, right? So like, tell me about that experience, because that's foreign to me. That's totally foreign.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, so by the time I went on to pastoring my second church where I was the lead pastor or the senior pastor. By then I was pretty progressively evangelical, but what does that mean? Like for a lot of folks, it's like, how is it possible to be evangelical and progressive? Well, here's what we mean by that. And it ties into what was back then, at least at one point, the evangelical left, right? So evangelicalism, I suppose there's a lot of different ways you can define it, but I would suggest the best way to define evangelicalism is it's understand, however you define the, or however, whatever you believe the Bible to say, whatever the hell it means, whatever it is inspired, inerrant, authoritative, whatever this thing is trying to say, it is from God. And so whatever it means, we have to follow it. And that's what makes you evangelical. That's the litmus test of evangelicalism is, do you believe that the Bible is the inspired, inerrant, authoritative word of God? Within that, though, or beyond that, the field's wide open in terms of how you interpret it. And so basically, though, I taught as a pastor that this was the inspired, inerrant, authoritative word of God, how we interpreted everything was about as progressive as you possibly can. So for instance, one example is the Bible holds world rule. The Old Testament speaks of how it holds world rulers accountable for making sure that every person is taken care of within their borders. Within Israel specifically, you were only supposed to, you could only go over your fields once, and everything that, and only that could go to your family. Everything that was missed in going over your fields that first time was left and reserved for the poor, for the foreign born, for the widow, etc. And the corners of your own fields, you couldn't even plow them at all. The corners of your fields, all of it had to go towards the widow, the foreign born, and the poor, the impoverished. And so we took that, we interpreted that being more progressive to say, right, well, that, though we were, fancy word, we can define it if you'd like, dispensationalists in the fact that we did not believe that the Old Testament law was for today because Jesus had fulfilled it all within himself. Yet nonetheless, we still see something about the heartbeat of God written within that. And so the heartbeat of God still does hold us, in the church and governments responsible for making sure that all people are cared for. And so what I actively taught was that if you are rich for the sole and exclusive purpose of finding joy in sharing your wealth with others. That's the only reason you have it. And if you're poor, this is a little bit more difficult for me to say, but this is what I would have taught back then. If you're poor, because I did believe in God and I did believe the Bible was authoritative. If you're poor, God has made you poor for the explicit purpose of you having the joy of receiving from others. And within that, God giving to more to some and less to others for the purpose of sharing to build community. I read everything in the Bible through the lens of community and togetherness. And so it was for the sole purpose of building greater community as we learn to rely and be interdependent along one another. And I actively taught that ideally you would be both poor and rich at some point in your life, that those who had the most privilege in a sense were those who were privileged enough to experience both sides of that interplay of community. Anyway, so that's one progressive angle where we believed it all was from God, therefore we're evangelical, but we defined it totally out of the box.
Drew, that is fucking fascinating because the people I grew up with would have just said, you're spitting Marxist propaganda, and that's not how you should be interpreting the Bible. That is like how my community would have interpreted that. But I actually think you're like, you know, in talking about like what's a legitimate view of the Bible versus not is so pedantic, and I don't want to go there. But like my reading, like even as someone who's not an active believer, right, I would say like there are passages that seem to suggest like there is like, I mean, like part of what you're saying is right. Like that there is like God's domain does account for the poor and for the rich, and there's supposed to be like a purpose in that. Like there does seem to be like evidence to that. And also that early Christian communities living in like these basically communes of like giving resources to each other and taking care of your own. Like that's biblical to me. You tell that to the average fundamentalist evangelical though, and they'll tell you, no, God obviously invented capitalism so that we're just all gonna work for ourselves and be good, right? Like that's that's kind of their take. But that is so fascinating. So what made you go from growing up in this evangelical community, developing these more progressive views, and now you're here on this side of, well, I think that none of this is true anymore? Because that's a pretty radical take too.
Yeah, no, I mean, absolutely. So along the way, like 2010, 2011, I started finding that as I'm continuing to study and read the scriptures, the Bible, right? And I'm looking out at the world around me, I begin to see more and more disconnect in terms of how does this really match up with reality? Is this really compatible? No matter how progressively or how I try, or just how I try and spend progressive, conservative, all of that whole framework aside, just how I read it and what it means. Like, is there any way to spin this to make this doable? And I saw that increasingly broken down. And then I started to see how then even the numbers, like there's a few, one of the big things was there's a few stories specifically in the Christian Old Testament where it tells the same story twice. And it's clearly by looking at the details, the story only happened once, but it's told in two different books, and the raw numbers conflict with one another. And in the Hebrew, they conflict with one another. And it's like, well, wait a minute, you can't reconcile. There's no way to reconcile this. And so those kinds of things eventually brought me to a point where then I looked around, but I loved my faith. I was comfortable in my faith. I work with a lot of folks, and I know for a lot of people, their church experiences, their faith experiences were incredibly traumatic, and it still haunts them to, decades after even. For myself, though, I thankfully I didn't have that. All the churches I was a part of, I'm able to say that, theology aside, although to some extent even the theology, but definitely in the way that the community worked, organizational culture, it was all really pretty healthy and empowering in things. Especially when I was the one leading it, but no, just kidding. So I really I loved my work. And I loved my faith. And so as I'm noticing my faith break down, and I'm finding it increasingly difficult to believe that a God exists, and that's really what it's centered on, is the existence of a God. And if the Christian Bible is really, it has lost all credibility, which in my mind it basically had. If the Bible had lost all credibility, then what other reason do I have to believe in the God it speaks of? Is there any good reason to believe in the God? And that's where then I'm looking around going, no, I don't see any good. The only reason I believe in the existence of a God is because I'm convinced that this is true. And so then I came to a point, fast forward to the end, in 2012, I came to a point where I said, you know what? One of two things is happening, or has happened. Either A, Christian ministry is unfit for this world because it's not true, because the theology, it's just not true. So either A, Christianity is unfit for this world, or B, I am unfit for Christian ministry because of my lack of belief. Maybe it is true, but I've been wrestling for like 2 years trying to believe this thing, and I can't. So either I'm unfit for Christian ministry, or Christian ministry is unfit for this world. But either way, I need to transition out of being a pastor. And so I left the ministry in 2012, even before I had really come to grips with the fact that I was becoming an atheist, or had maybe become one, but still fighting for my faith even when I left the church. And then shortly, a few months after that, I had come to grips that, I had become an atheist. And then I started blogging about my journey and doing some things like that. Eventually, a couple years later, I discovered something called the Clergy Project. For those who might not be aware of it, it's this nonprofit that was founded by the likes of Dan Barker, Linda Lascola, Dan Dennett, and Richard Dawkins, along with a couple other folks. And what it is, it's a nonprofit that provides community resourcing, provides different kinds of support, as well as community or career transition assistance to religious leaders around the world of all different religions who no longer believe. And now what do they do? If you're an imam in the Middle East and you realize you've become an atheist, how do you navigate the next chapter? What does that look like? Can you ever admit it? You know, so working with folks in those kinds of things. So I joined as a member, then I started working in other things. I was the communications director for a little while, and then eventually served as president. I was the second president, executive director of Clergy Project for a spell. And then, and along the way, embraced humanism. As a pastor, I actually embraced what I called Christian humanism. I thought humanism even then was a good thing, but we were the Christian variety of humanist, even when I was still an evangelical. And then eventually I circled back and was like, nah, humanism, I really find a lot of just it resonates within me, and started teaching and coaching from that perspective, just trying to help folks out in very real, tangible ways. So.
Drew, first of all, thank you so much for sharing your story with that. Normally this is right when I get to calls, but I want to talk to you a little bit more, because like you touched on something there that really hit me. But before we do, I need to remind folks, we do have open lines. So we do want to talk to you guys, but again, you guys need to call in. It's 512-991-9242. And come call us, come talk to us, especially if you can relate to what Drew is putting down here. You said a phrase, Drew, that you like awoke like a deep core memory in me. Like, you ever seen that movie, that Pixar movie, with the emotions in the girl's head?
Soul?
Inside Out. I think it's Inside Out.
Yeah,
right?
Inside Out.
Oh, okay, Inside Out. That's what you did.
Yep,
you just awoke a core memory in me. This is what you said. You said, I love the faith, and like that was what was hard for you to give up. And like that's so true, because when we talk about atheism, when we talk about the worldviews of Christianity, atheism, or the spectrum in between, we often talk about it as, philosophical, concepts that you can accept or deny. It's like this logical reasoning that we go through and see, well, if the Bible doesn't make sense here, then we have to go to here, and then we have to do this. And like, that was a part of my deconstruction for sure. Absolutely. Right. Like realizing that these contradictions were there and this other stuff didn't make sense. But why was it so hard for me to leave? It was hard because I found my identity in this, right? Like that was the hard part. Like realizing I put all of my friends in this, my family was in this. And that was tough. That was so tough to leave, because like, I have heard, Drew, just from doing this show and outside this show, the most awful stories from people you can imagine in being in Christianity. And to be honest with you, for the most part, mine wasn't like that. Mine was pretty good, but like but I couldn't make it work. I couldn't intellectually make it work. So I had to be honest with myself and leave. But that was hard. That was so difficult, because it's a very lonely thing to do. Right. Like I remember just feeling like nobody could relate to that experience, because with atheists that I thought I knew were these super rational, very logical people that I just didn't have that kind of background to. My background was in Christianity, where it's like your emotions are tied to like the Holy Spirit and all these other kind of spiritual concepts. And I don't know. It was tough. It was tough. You kind of had to forge your own path. You picking up what I'm putting down here, Drew? Because you touched that. You touched something in my head there, right? Yeah. Yes,
100%, my friend. 100%. You and me the same. Yes.
Well, comment on that, because like how did you do it? How did you leave the good life? Because for me, it was a good life. Like I had some complaints, but it was okay.
No, I mean, it was great. I mean, you're right in the center, whether you're a minister or not, but especially if you're a minister or any other, any kind of ministry, pastor or otherwise. But even if you're not, you're right in the center of this epic saga between good and evil and God. You have, the designer of the universe is madly in love with you, at least depending on the kind of Christian. The more fundamentalist you go, the more rightward you tend to go, the more maybe God isn't madly in love with you and he absolutely hates you and detests you and it's all hellfire or brimstone. And that's where you tend to find more of the trauma, right? But if you're more like me, which it sounds like maybe you were, it's less about hell and it's more just about how God has just created this wonderful purpose and plan for you, and just trust in him, live by him daily, and he will guide you into the greatest of wonders. Not quite the name it and fame it, at least for me. It wasn't really the name it and claim it thing, you know, the what's it called? The motivational gospel. What's the name? I'm forgetting what it is. But, you know, not quite that really, because we didn't embrace that, you know, pray for a new car and God will give you one if you're truly believing. But it was just more of this, just trust in him, nothing to worry about, never have a care in the world. If something bad happens, it's tough right now for a spell, but you're right in the palm of his hand. Trust him. He has things to teach you along the way. So pick those up, embrace them, and just try and make the most of it as you just live your life open to him, and he'll bring you where he needs you to be. And even if this life ends in death, which eventually it will for all of us, even if yours ends a bit prematurely, so felt in death, at least you have heaven afterwards. But you are always, even in the most difficult of learning lessons, you are always in the palm of his hand and always on your way to great glory. So then you try and leave that. Now you're leaving that, and it's like, you're no longer in the middle of this epic love poem between you and God. You're no longer in the middle of this huge battle. And as a pastor, you're no longer the hero. You're no longer the savior. Not that I saw myself as a savior or hero. I would not have seen myself that way. But in retrospect, that is very much how that is very much the psychology there. God has placed you on mission. He has given you a personal mission. Trust him, and you will do. He will do amazing things through you, which feels a lot like you doing amazing things yourself, or at least you're along the ride for amazing, cool things, right? And then now all of a sudden, you realize it's all bullshit. Yeah. And now all of a sudden, all of this just comes to this end, and suddenly, you're just sitting in the midst of this huge, lonely existence.
Right.
There's no more God to talk to. There's no more best friend in the corner or within your heart. And if you're public about it, most likely your whole human community's cut you off as well. So you don't have them. A good friend of mine, you know, when he went through he lost his kids, his grandkids. You guys know, Dave Warnock, right? So like he lost so much. I've been talking about Dave for years, and I've been talking about Dave's story for years, right? I mean, he's another one for those who know Dave Warnock who went through, his story is so much more difficult than mine. And so you're cut off from everything. And it's just really hard. It's really hard. So,
it is.
Anyway,
it is.
I could talk on and on about this for hours.
You're preaching.
Maybe other people have calls.
Let me give you some snaps, Drew. Let me give you some snaps. You know, you're preaching. You're preaching. I can feel it. But it's like you know, you're part of the structure. You're part of this grand design that is supposed to make you feel special, but also just give you an existential comfort that everything is all right. And these trials that you're going through are just a test from God. Or perhaps they're just an obstacle to a path, but the goal is to have greater faith. Like the goal is to have a closer relationship with God and to live through that. And so like when that's your ultimate life purpose, right? Because that's ultimately what it was for me. I tried to view my life through that, and you lose that. Like you feel pretty lost. It is pretty hard. And like we talked about this too. Like we opened this conversation talking about our political views. Like in my in my church background, like politics didn't seem to be the number one thing, but I realized that the church as an institution and how it placed me in that system put me as a part of that political view as well. Like even if I wasn't consciously aware of it, I was informed of a certain political perspective as well, which is why like the intersection of church and politics is so interesting. It's why us as critics talk about that angle as much. Whereas in the church, it really didn't come up because it was almost like you couldn't even see it. It's like your fish can't even see the water that it's swimming in. But that's what I was swimming in was this perspective as well, right? Of like, well, I understand I need to have empathy, right? I need to have compassion for others because that's what Jesus wants. But I can't accept your marriage as legitimate, or I can't accept that you're having sexual relations with this person is also legitimate because it's not through the sanctity of marriage. You know, it's like there's terms and conditions to your compassion that you have to have when you sign up for this thing. So I don't know. I'm reflecting a lot now because you've opened up again this core memory here when you were preaching there. But it's true, it's hard. So we're having a great conversation. I want to ask you one more question though before we talk to some callers here, and I
Sure.
want to know. So we're talking about having this path, having this life set out for you through the narrative that there is a God, He has a purpose for you, and this is the community that you're supposed to be serving in. When you lose that, what do you do after that, Drew? What did you do after that? How did you build the pieces?
Yeah, I mean, so for me, the first step was a little bit more of a cognitive philosophical role. And I'll just touch on that very briefly because I know the thrust of what you're saying. I believe what the thrust of your asking about is more from a community lens. But the first thing I did, I felt the need to completely disconnect. I stepped back from everyone. I defriended my entire Facebook list. I actually even took a sabbatical from my marriage, if you will. And I just I felt so much pressure. I felt so claustrophobic from an ethical framework lens, from just an understanding the worldview lens, because from the time I was in high school, I was the kind of guy, as progressive as I might appear in some things. I mean, my entire identity, like you said, was Jesus. I was nothing without him. And I did everything I could all day, every day to build my entire life around what I believed the Bible taught. I would get up every day and have a list of things set before me of things I'm going to sacrifice today for my God. Just meaning lifestyle things. Okay, I prefer pepperoni, but so-and-so prefers, cheese. So I'm going to deny pepperoni today. Just, whatever, all these things. And now that's all gone. And I'm like, I had no idea how to function. So I took 6 months and just unplugged from everyone and everything and just spent all day reading and walking up and down the Chicago lake shores and just kind of rebuilding my sense of ethic. Because, I talk about this a bit on secular sexuality, the episode I was on a few weeks ago. I go into this in more detail in terms of just from what are my sexual ethics, just what are my ethics in general. And how do I rebuild this from the ground up? Because I took nothing for granted. I mean, my previous ethic at one point was, abortion is murder.
Yeah.
And now I'm realizing, wait a minute, even murder is the worst sin ever. Even that isn't actually a sin at all, maybe. And so if that's not a sin, then is it a sin to just walk up and unconsensually grab a woman? Which is something that I was encouraged to do fresh in my deconversion as I was navigating how, as a new, remember I mentioned the sabbatical for my wife that turned into a divorce. But so now I'm trying to navigate all these things. What's right? What's wrong? Some people are telling me, no, you can go ahead and do that. They like it when you do that. Yeah. I mean, I don't know. Do they? I don't know. I mean, if murder is not murder, then maybe sexual ethics aren't sexual ethics. Like, how do so I had to rebuild the entire groundwork. Then I landed in humanism. Then from there, it is, well, how do I build community? What does that look like? And I was so alone for like 2 years, 2012 to 2014. Then in 2014, someone connected me to another former fundamentalist, former evangelical group. And then someone in that group this was an online Facebook group, which was Moody. It's called the Moody Heretics. You talk about Moody Bible Institute, the Moody Heretics Facebook group. Someone in there was a former minister, and they're like, we need to connect you to the Clergy Project. And that's when then it's like, whoa, I'm not all alone in this thing, y'all. Like, there's a whole world of people just like me. I thought I was like the only one, pretty much. And then that's when I started to feel connection. So long story short, I guess, is you can look in a lot of different ways. If somebody has a call on this, we can go into more detail. But I have a bunch of ideas for you, I guess, if we want to go into it in terms of online community, offline community, real life community, developing community, all that kind of stuff.
It's so interesting you mentioned just the rebuilding of your ethics, because for someone who is maybe outside of the Christian space, that may sound pretty radical. Like, that may sound like a hyperbole, but it's really not. When you're told that this book and also this community and this person, i.e. God or being, is the foundation for your ethics, period. Like, you don't do anything outside of what the big man upstairs tells you to do, then you really don't know how to navigate the world. I wish, like, look, I could have read Aristotle. I could have read John Rawls, like Jeremy Bentham. Like if I had grown up with those guys instead of fucking Paul, like the Apostle Paul, I think like I would have had a better understanding of what's right and wrong, right? And it's still like it's something we all have to figure out, right? Like ethics is still a developing field, something that we have to change. But it's like, the Bible was not it. It was not it. Like it really is so basic in its ideas of morality. Like, yeah, okay, there's some people that say Jesus was this great moral teacher. Okay, sure, he had a few one-liners and a parable or two, but like, have you read like Kant? Like these guys like made whole books about how to be good, and they still don't know how. Like, it's very complicated. It's a lot more complicated than what Christianity makes it out to be. And then I just want to emphasize that, because your story of saying like, I didn't know what murder was anymore, it's like, that sounds pretty radical, but in that context, like, I get it. I know what you're trying to say, because it's very hard to get that through. But hey, you know what, Drew, we have some people who want to talk to us, so I think we should get to some calls.
Let's do it.
Let's do that. But before we do, Drew, we have to thank our patron of the week, because every single week we always thank a person from patreon.com/truthwanted. We want to thank everybody that donates on that Patreon, but especially we always give a shout out to one patron every single week. And this week's patron of the week is going to be Robert. Thank you so much, Robert. It's just Robert, no last name, no adjective, no objectively Robert, nothing. It's just Robert. Thank you, Robert, for donating on that Patreon. And thank you again to everybody that donates on patreon.com/TW. I almost mixed up the URL there, but you guys rock. Thank you to everybody who does that. And now, Drew, I think it's time that we talk to some people. So you ready to go?
Let's do it.
Okay. First, we're going to talk to Richard. Richard, who's calling in from Arizona. Richard, you're live on Truth Wanted. What's up?
Hey, not too much. Yeah, I was good. Yeah, I called there. Yes. Oh, hold on for 1 sec. Let me get the pizza out of the oven. You got me.
Shoot. Save me a slice, Richard. Save me a slice. I hope it's pepperoni.
Girl. Hey, girl, you want to come over for some Truth Wanted and pizza? Yeah, that's a date, dude. I like it.
Is Netflix on as well?
We need Netflix. Just Truth Wanted. Truth Wanted and chill. Yeah. That's it.
Okay. Hold on for 1 sec, okay? Yes, I'm sorry.
Oh, man. Richard's got the dog out.
Richard, I'm on the edge of my seat, Richard.
I know. I hope, Richard, you have pineapple. Do you have pineapple on that pizza, Richard? I hope you do.
I got it out of the oven, so I'm okay. Okay, I called you may have remember me from last week, right?
You'll have to give some context for the audience. What were you talking about last week?
Oh no! I had my family, the prayer warriors, that they're praying for me to come back to Jesus.
Yes. I
my family, my stepson, and but it has nothing to do with this. My thing is, I still have, even though I'm an atheist and everything, I still am trying to get through that lingering fear of hell. And I was wondering how you guys dealt with it, and.
Drew, you got a response to that? Take it from the top, man. I want to hear you.
Yeah. Well, I mean, let me ask you a little bit here, Richard, if I may. What do you think? This may seem like an obvious, a stupid question, obvious answer sort of thing, but I'd like you to unpack a little bit for me, because it is different for different folks. What is it about hell that scares you?
Let's
delve into that fear a little bit.
From some God. How's that?
Yeah, no, go ahead. Let's unpack that a little bit.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead and unpack that. Yeah, just tell me more.
Yeah, well, I guess the whole simply is just I have this lingering in the back of my mind fear thing that if I do die, and I was a Christian, so I got saved. So I guess once saved, always saved. Hey, that's good for me. I just have that lingering thing in the back of my head. I don't know what you mean by unpack. I'm not
sure. So, but are you nervous that you are living an immoral, unethical life? Is it more that you are nervous that God is real and hell is real? Are there any nervousnesses about that? Or are you fully confident that God is not real? It's all bullshit, but you still have this lingering emotional stuff, even though in your mind it's not it's all bullshit, but the fear is still there.
Exactly, that's it. You got it.
Okay. Okay. So you are 100% confident that there's no God, there's no hell, and yet you still have this like.
No, I'm not 100% confident of anything. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
But mostly confident.
But you're not convinced. You're not convinced that
God doesn't exist.
Yeah. You're not convinced that God's real.
Do you think that there's a hell? Do you think that there might be a hell?
Yeah.
Yeah. Think that there might be one?
No, there might be one. I mean, but I don't think there is one.
Okay.
There could be a might for everything.
Yeah. So here's why I asked those things, Richard.
Go ahead. That hell isn't real.
Okay. Yeah. Well, here's why I asked that, Richard.
Just the thing.
No, and I apologize too. It seems that there's a bit of a delay on my end, and so I apologize for overstepping you. I think I was overstepping Dan as well at certain points, but so I apologize for the delay. But yeah, no. So here's why I ask those questions, Richard, is because there are different situations for some folks. Some folks, there is sort of this nagging question in the back of their minds. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that there is no God, and I'm pretty sure there's no hell. And yet sometimes late at night, when it's a rough day, I just get this itch that makes me wonder. For other folks, it's not that. And it sounds, and I mentioned that in case there might be other folks where that is their situation, or maybe now you're saying that is. Like, do you kind of wonder maybe there is sometimes? Okay. So with that,
I wonder. Sure. I wonder.
Okay. Well, and also the other side of that is sometimes the other side of that is it's purely psychological triggering stuff that is almost completely disconnected from the cognitive.
Yeah.
But but the emotions cripple us even though we're confident that there's not. So there are two different distinct situations. That's why I asked all of that aside.
Yep.
All of that aside.
Well, yeah.
So
see, I was brought up Christian from birth, or what? Well, I would say from birth, but I was going to be a youth minister with Christ for the Nations and yada yada and all that kind of stuff. But that kind of fell through because I didn't have a good reason to believe the things that I did, or I had believed. So I was like
Richard, if there is a hell, and I'll say that because every once in a while you're there's this part of you nagging within saying maybe there is one. So if there is one, what about you would send you there? What about you is deserving of it?
Oh, from going away from Jesus Christ and slipping away from the church and that kind of thing, because like I say, I was saved a couple of times and rededicated my life a few times. But that's basically it.
See, there's this.
Have you ever had anything? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I want to chime in here because this hits home with me. For Richard, you watched the show. Maybe you've heard me tell this story. I've told this story before on this platform, but the week that I did my follow-up interview with Anthony Magnabosco was when I was talking about my story. It was the first time I'd ever told the world that I was an atheist, right? And that this is the conclusion that I come to. Obviously I had conversations with friends and stuff, but this is the first time I was making a kind of a public statement about it. That week, Richard, I had not one, not two, but three nightmares that week where two of them I woke up in a cold sweat of I was about to die and I could either accept God or Jesus into my heart and go to heaven, or continue my life of, I don't know, sin and idolatry until the last moment, and then I guess go to hell. I guess that was what was going to happen. I don't know. I woke up before it happened, but why was that happening? Because I have this rational take of, well, This is where I'm at, conclusively. I don't believe in Christianity. I don't think any of this is real, but I'm still having these nightmares. Does that lend any truth to the situation that hell is real? Does that give an indication that maybe this whole thing actually has some truth to it? No. What is it an indication of? If anything, trauma, but not even going that far. It's an indication that I was taught an ideology and taught a theology that there was going to be consequences for my thought and consequences for being honest with my doubts. Like, that's really what a lot of evangelical circles of Christianity do. That obviously this isn't true for all Christian theology. There's some that say when you're saved, you're always saved. You don't have to have these worries, but that wasn't the circles that I grew up with. The circles that I grew up with were like yours, Richard, where I had to rededicate myself to Christ constantly and ask him forgiveness for my sins, or else I was not good. I did not have keys to the kingdom, unless I made good with myself. So that's abuse. That is abusive. In any other context or situation, if we looked at an ancient society and saw that this is how they ran things, we would say, wow, that's terrible. That's horrible. We would never wish that upon people. And yet somehow we accept that for ourselves because Christianity is the mainstream thought in American culture, right? Pretty mainstream. It's pretty accepted that this is a thing that happens. So the good news is, Richard, is that your kids, if you have any, well, actually, I know you have some because you were talking about it. The future generations will not have to suffer as much as we have in this suffering, because it is a kind of suffering. Thankfully, I've been able to work through that myself and just keep living my life. And I don't know how long it's been for you, Richard. I hope you can say the same. But there's not one whole cure for this, right? And anything like if you go to cognitive behavioral therapy, you usually have to go to more than one session. It's usually not just a one and done thing. But talking about it with other people, talking to folks like us, talking to other people who can relate to you in your situations, that seems to be the way to go. That seems to be some of the best things you can do for yourself, and remind yourself that, hey, this was the situation that I was a part of, and this is not cool. And I'm here to affirm to you, Richard, that situation, that's not cool. You should not be having fears or doubts as an atheist that you're going to burn for eternity just because you're not convinced that a book that claims it has miracles and things can happen that you've never seen is true. That's not reasonable by any stretch of the imagination. So if I can do anything for you today, Absolutely. Richard, I would give you that affirmation and tell you you're all right. So that
David,
was a lot.
Richard, I'd like to encourage you with one other thing here, Richard. One other takeaway here. So, in addition to surrounding yourself with community and other voices who are in the same spot that you are, just like Objectively Dan was saying there, I think that normalizes it for you. You realize you're not the only one who has this fear, and each person that you share that with, who shares that experience with you, you can see how there's different sides of it, right? They fear it for different reasons, and it normalizes it. Also takes out some of the mystery, some of the power out of it. But there's one other thing I'd encourage you, and that's time. Time sucks in some ways, though, because time takes time. So, like, I think of, now this is a sort of a totally different kind of situation, but when I was in high school and I first started driving, I was a terrible driver. And I got in like 5 accidents in my first year of driving. And it was so bad that then for the next 3 years through high school and beyond that, I would have panic attacks when driving. Anytime I would pass someone, and I grew up out in the country, so we didn't pass that many people, right? But anytime I would pass somebody or driving on a road with a deep ditch, I would get so panicky. I was convinced I was going to fall into the ditch. I was convinced that my car was going to go off the road. Why was I convinced? And it didn't happen, by the way. It stopped happening. But why was I convinced? I was convinced because that's what my previous experiences had taught me. When our previous experiences have taught us to believe in the existence of hell, even though it's not real, hell's no more real than me having to fall into the ditch every time I drive is real. But when our experiences teach us that something must be real, it takes a while for us to shed that fear, that trauma, that belief. But eventually, hopefully, especially under the care of a good therapist, perhaps, eventually the distance behind those beliefs grow wider and wider apart, and the fear starts to minimize. And so I'd encourage you, I wish there was an easier answer, but Richard, I encourage you, just hang in there, my guy, and hopefully over time, it'll get a little easier, and surround yourself with good community to help walk that journey with you. Is that helpful?
Richard, you still on the line with us?
Oh, yeah.
Richard, if you're still on the line, we can't hear you, but I'm going to go ahead and end the call now. I hope you're able to pick that up. If not, well, obviously, you're probably watching this on YouTube right now and seeing what you missed. So there you go. That's our takes on that call. But I'm glad Richard brought this up, because I think there is this, again, we're talking about like identity. We're talking about like what it means to have these labels. There is an identity, like this idea that atheists are these cool, rational people who just, you just gotta think through all your problems, man, and it's all good. But it's like, no, we're still human beings who have nervous systems that can be affected by the trauma of our environments, the abuse in our environments, and yeah, I'm not afraid to call that ideology an abusive one. I think by any objective metric, it is. And that might, again, it's controversial to say to an average Christian, you to say, oh, well, this is abuse. You shouldn't be telling people this, but it is. And if it wasn't, you wouldn't have people like Richard calling in, frankly, strangers to ask for advice, to ask for a perspective on this. Like that's there's no world in which that's okay. That shouldn't have to be a thing. But here it is. And I'm obviously happy to help whenever I can and share with those experiences, because you're right, Drew. It's when you're able to talk it out, when you're able to normalize a bit and say like, hey, whoa, this was crazy that we thought this is. Aren't we glad that we don't think this anymore? Like that kind of helps. It really does. It really, really does.
Yeah.
Real quick, we have to get to our promo, and I'm told today's promo is a funny one, so I'm gonna have to mute my mic on this one. But we're gonna play a promo for you to show you some of the other shows that are happening here at the Atheist Community of Austin. So check this out.
Yeah, but the solution, so to speak, that I'm hearing you say is talk about it.
Whoa, what?
Talk about it.
No, we can't talk about sex. No.
Yeah. Jesus.
Embarrassing.
Yeah.
It's so scary to talk about sex.
You say you want to promote skepticism, but you make a living creating ghost hunting apps? Do you mean your primary source of income is from this app?
My primary source of income is from ghost hunting apps. Yes.
No.
That's incredible.
And when you pray, you shall not be like the hypocrites, for they love to pray standing in the synagogues and on the corners of the streets, that they may be seen by men.
So you define the source of the universe as this God. How does that give you a better handle on navigating this world? Because it seems to me it's just philosophical masturbation, and I don't mean to insult you or masturbators.
I guess we're done then, because I gave you a full minute to explain why you believe something, and all you did was continue down your philosophical ragging on what you assert is fallacious atheist epistemology and bias. So thanks for nothing.
We're going to be talking about cuffing the carrot,
Saucing the taco,
paddling the pink canoe,
flicking the bean,
menage a moi,
beating the bishop,
burping the worm,
shaking hands with the milkman,
the 5-knuckle shuffle,
dopamine farming,
stamina mining,
having a threesome with a couple of no-shows,
double-clicking your mouse,
summoning the semen demon,
making Jesus cry,
churning the butter,
badgering the witness,
tickling the pickle.
Folks, if you're not
Can I laugh now?
Yeah, listen, we're not supposed to respond to the promo, but folks, if you're not watching these shows on YouTube so you can watch the promo and the videos, you need to be, because it's pretty good. It's pretty good stuff. Yeah, man, love being part of this network, man. You get to see some good clips. I'll tell you that. But hey, let's go ahead and talk to some more people, Drew, because we got some other folks who want to talk to us. This will be what I hope an interesting conversation. This is Isaiah calling in from Korea. Isaiah, you are live on Truth Wanted. What's up?
Hey, how you guys doing?
Hey, Isaiah.
Doing all right, Isaiah. What's
hey,
up?
Yeah, I do got to say that I thought you guys did an amazing job with that last caller. I am a Christian, but these kind of things do cause me some I guess, cognitive dissidence about my views. And I grew up as like a minister's kid, so I'm well aware of how absolutely traumatizing some of the teachings can be, because it did that to me. But anyway, you guys did a great job of dealing with him.
I appreciate the sentiment there, Isaiah. What is it you wanted to talk to us about?
Yeah, so I'm not a physicist or anything like this. I don't have any great knowledge or insight, but I'm just curious about what you guys would think about. Suppose we were to find out that a multiverse was real. Would you think that that's more likely to exist inside of a God or not God world?
Yeah. So would the multiverse affect the null hypothesis, essentially, that, the null hypothesis being that there isn't a God, right? Like I don't assert that a God needs to exist in my worldview. He could.
Yeah.
Or it, she, whatever. So does it affect that? Does it change the meter for me? I would say no, because it seems to me, at least the speculation in the physics community, is that there could be a multiverse, and they're coming to that conclusion based on physics, right? So like there are people smarter than me who went to school for longer than I have, who are looking at string theory, who are looking at cosmology, the study of the origins of the universe, and who are saying, hey, this could be a possibility. And they're coming to that conclusion because they're observing natural laws. They're doing very complicated math problems, and they're figuring this out just based on pure human observation. And so if they're coming to that conclusion just based on that alone, that couldn't convince me of a God in any way, shape, or form, right? Because what credence does that give to the hypothesis that a God started the universe? It doesn't tell me anything. It doesn't tell me that 2 gods started the universe, or maybe 3 or 4. It doesn't tell me that an alien could have started. It doesn't say anything about it, right? So it doesn't move the needle for me. And again, that doesn't mean it couldn't be. It doesn't mean that a God could have started everything and created a bunch of universes. It just doesn't lead any credence to it, right? It doesn't push the needle for me. So does that make sense, Isaiah?
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you. Appreciate that. And what about
Drew? Do you have any thoughts?
Do you have anything?
Yeah, no, I'm right there with Dan on this one. I really don't see how it's pertinent at all. I don't see any difference that it would make. I mean, if there's a God somehow, somewhere, what does that have to do with a multiverse? I mean, I guess there could be one with or without, if there would be one. I don't see how a multiverse would make it more likely that there would be one or not. Sorry, but I just don't see the relevance. Or also kind of my big question. Now, granted, I'm not a huge philosopher, but my big question with stuff like this, especially when we connect it with a God, is why does it matter? Why does it matter? Why? Yeah, I just don't get it. Sorry, I don't mean that disrespectfully.
Interesting. What are your thoughts?
No. I'm just. Well, I don't know. I am a Christian, so I do have there are a few mixed thoughts on this. But one of them would be, if I could analyze this as a non-believer, I would think, because I was an atheist for about 10 years or so. But if I were to analyze that, it would seem, and this might just be this speaks to personal incredulity or just your own. I understand a large part of this is just what you think is rational, but it would seem something that complex would start to be more in line of, clearly this was like a result of something, some kind of creator. Whether or not you know exactly what that is, like, that doesn't mean that that's Jesus. You know what I mean? It just, for me, that would make deism more plausible in my opinion. But as a Christian, what causes me the most difficulties and troubles is that if this is the only universe, and we're being judged for our time here on the earth, then a lot of the choices that we make, you kind of talked about this briefly, about the cognitive behavioral therapy and about how things get programmed into us and it takes time to change. And so, like, a lot of the choices we make, a lot of the thought programs have been programmed by our family or society. And so it seems like so unreasonable as a Christian to judge somebody for one lifetime. Like, I would find, if I could choose myself, like, the Buddhist model makes so much more sense, or the Hinduism model where you have multiple tries and reincarnations to try to get things right. The Christianity is just one and done, and then most of the choices you wind up making are from other things, you know. Anyway, that's just my own personal spill.
I have a question for you, if I may.
Okay, Drew's got a question, and then I'll talk after him. Go ahead, Drew. Go ahead, Drew. You got it.
So Isaiah, you had said something about that maybe where the relevance of the multiverse is in terms of whether or not there's a God is that if there's a multiverse that would add to a much greater complexity and therefore be more likely to necessitate an outside force to create it. And so I'm curious at what point is the universe or multiverse, at what point is the complexity so intense that now it's triggered, the mandate of a God creator has been triggered now? Where is that? Is it already there? If it's already there in your view, then what's the difference? Because in my mind, I don't see the need for a God for any of it. Whether it's one universe or many universes, I don't see the need at all. But at what point in your mind is it suddenly required, but it wasn't before?
You know what? I could just speak to my own. If you're talking about me,
yeah, that's all I'm asking. I'm just asking about you and your view. That's all I'm asking about.
Yeah, this is a completely illogical position that I held to. But one day, because I live in South Korea, and I was hiking up some mountains for hours and hours and hours on end, and there were like these giant boulders that, like the size of like Volkswagens. I swear these things are giant. And I went down these things for hours and hours on end. And at some point, you know, the first hour is kind of like exciting, and then you're just kind of like, God, when is this going to end? You know. And it seemed like an eternity I was up there. But in that moment, I didn't become a Christian as a result of that, but just seeing like the vastness of even South Korea. South Korea is a really small country, but seeing how many mountains there were and being on there myself, I personally came to some kind of conclusion that there was something out there. Like, I didn't become a Christian till like maybe 6 or 7 years afterwards. But I would just kind of like fall into this deism camp. And I'm like, I don't know what it is. I don't think we could know. But, you know, I just personally believe that there's something that was out there. But that's not a rational conclusion. It was just kind of an emotional one, I guess.
Sure. Well, you know, Isaiah, like personal incredulity cuts both ways, right? It cuts both ways.
Sure,
you could make the case and say, complexity. I can't believe that this was all just from nothing, right? That there is no driving force behind this, no creative force. It has to be a God. Or I could also say, well, I don't believe out of Christianity, out of all the human religions that have ever existed, is exactly the right one. You know, like you can cut it both ways. One thing I'll point just with your example of observation of nature, right? When you like take a look at something like the Grand Canyon, a lot of people will say, well, man, I just have to know God's real because look at the majesty of this place. And I agree with them in the sense that it's incredible, it's beautiful, and it does something to the human mind that, you know, maybe we don't even fully understand why we have that reaction to it. But at the same time, at least as far as the Grand Canyon goes, we can actually describe how the Grand Canyon was formed through the natural processes that we know exist, right? We know that it was cut through with the Colorado River, I believe, right? Colorado, going through that canyon over thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of years. And we know that it comes with these formations because we have these observations through nature, right? That come to that conclusion. So for the universe, there's a lot of things that we don't know. There's a lot of things that we don't have those observations for, but we've been able to explain a heck of a lot just through natural phenomena alone. And while we may not be able to have the answers to cosmology, the absolute beginnings, I have to make a bet with myself, just like everybody else on this earth, that says, well, what do I think is the best bet? Do I think it has to be something natural, or do I think it has to be something supernatural, infinitely complex? I don't tend to lean towards the deism. I just don't think that the observation that the universe exists itself is going to be enough for me. Now, again, deism is going to be separate from Christianity, right? So I understand people taking more of a deistic view rather than a Christian. When Christian, you get into some very specific ideas about creation, very specific ideas about humanity's place and all that, and relationship with the creator, things like that. So I'm sympathetic to a deistic worldview in the sense that, wow, I can look at the majesty of everything and think, man, there's got to be something to it. But it's mere existence, I don't think can be enough for me. And maybe so the question being, well, what is going to be enough for me? To be honest, I'm not sure. because I am just kind of making a God of the gaps argument, except for nature, right? I'm just saying, well, I think it's just natural forces, but nature time and time again is proving to be able to explain a lot of things that previous religious ideas were just guesses on, really. I mean, what information were they going off of? I mean, to talk about specifically the book of Genesis, I mean, we can take a look at that and see how a lot of the claims in there, if you're taking a literal stance on it, does not match up with our current observations of space, time, or the earth or anything. So I don't know, Isaiah, that's all I can tell you there. But I appreciate you calling in and giving us your perspective on it. Any other thoughts you wanted to let us know about?
No, actually, no, because I don't know this topic well enough. I just wanted to get your opinion. But I do have one last question for you, Dan.
Of course.
How is Mila Kunis doing? I'm just kidding. Sorry.
God damn it.
I still think he
God damn it.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, guys. Have a good day.
Thanks, Isaiah. Good talking with you.
Thank you.
Listen.
Okay.
I talked to Isaiah before. Let me explain. And he made that joke. He said, "How's Mila Kunis doing?" And I did not realize he was saying I looked like Ashton Kutcher. But apparently this is a common sentiment amongst people that I resemble Ashton Kutcher. And you know what? You do what you want with that information. I don't know if that's me, but
that's not a bad thing.
I guess so. I guess in the pure aesthetics department, that's not the worst.
That's a good looking dude, right? I mean, he's a cool guy.
I think so. So. Yeah. Anyway, it's a interesting talk. I think I've said all I wanted to say on that topic, though. Drew, did you have any follow-up thoughts on that?
I mean, I guess just one sentence, when Isaiah was talking about, sitting up on the mountain or whatnot and the vastness of everything he was looking at, it led him to, eventually to God belief. My primary thought was, rather than the vastness of what he's looking at, more the vastness of what his emotions are doing. What's his emotive response? That's more what it comes to in my mind. The vastness of his emotive response is like, wow, there's this emotional connection. This has to be something more that's less rooted in science or anything objective and more just rooted in the inside stuff that's so easily not necessarily reflective of reality. So that's
I mean, how many people will look out and say, oh, well, this must be, I don't know, Zeus that made this. I guess Zeus isn't really the creator type to do that kind of thing. But you know what I'm saying, right? Like even I understand he's talking about the deistic conception, which is different, which attempts to be a bit more objective than any specific Christian idea. But I would still argue that like our concept of the deistic God is still like very much based on Western concepts and ideas of like creator beings and gods. Like when people are talking about a creator, they're talking about somebody with intention, right? Like they're talking about, I don't know, there's a person, a human almost element to that wouldn't really make sense outside of, I don't know, human beings talking about that idea. I don't know. There's another thought there.
I mean, I think I want to say that the vast majority of deists, and maybe I'm speaking from the background from which I come, so it might not be true, but I want to say that the vast majority of deists, historically speaking, and of deistic movements have been offshoots or those who were former Christians, formerly of a Christian influence. And so they're taking a Christian concept and applying it in different ways. And so it's still going to carry those embedded features within it.
It's true. Look at the Freemasons, man. They say they're about deism, but they're all Christians. I'm not going to dunk on the Freemasons today. I'll let them be. But regardless, real quickly, I need to talk about some ways that you can support this show. So if you really like Truth Wanted, if you support what we're doing here, just a reminder, I'm a volunteer here, and most of the people that help out in this show are also volunteers. So when you donate on that Patreon, you are helping make this show happen. I don't personally receive any of that money. One other thing I want to talk about that you can support us with is our merch store. If you want to show off that you're a Truth Wanted listener and you're cool for doing it, again, Truth Wanted and chill, like that should be a thing. Definitely check out the Truth Wanted merch. We're trying a new thing, our very first monthly t-shirt club that we got going on here. And you can get that Austin shirt. I think it's really cool. I love all the stuff that's on there. It's got like a dude with a tinfoil hat on there and stuff. Like I can't describe it all in 10 seconds. You have to go look at that shirt. and see if it's something that you want. But thank you again to everybody who supports us through doing that. You guys are really awesome. So with that out of the way, I want to talk to some more people here as we're getting towards the tail end of the show. Let's see how many people we can talk to at the end. Okay.
Yes.
Let's talk to William, who's calling in from Canada. William, you are live on Truth Wanted. What's up?
Hi.
Hey, William.
Hi, William. What's up?
Yeah, I'm doing fine. I'm just chilling. I want to talk on one of those shows.
Yeah, Truth Wanted and Chill. I understand. It's a vibe. I love it. Well, what do you want to talk to us about today, William?
Well, I was first about the question you guys asked. Is humanism is a valid worldview? What's about it that's valid? Like what's the valid? I don't understand it quite.
Sure, yeah, Dan. If you want me to jump in,
yeah, go for it, Drew. You jump in on this.
So I mean, humanism, I suppose, can be defined a few different ways. There is some aspect to humanism being in the eye of the beholder, proverbial speaking. But largely how it's seen, kind of the common thread is humanism is this idea, this concept of simply, nice and simple, being humans helping humans with human-based solutions to human problems, right? So it's very much centered on humanity rather than humans looking towards external resources like a god or other supernatural qualities to try and help solve our problems for us. So humans looking to humans, helping one another out to find human-based solutions to human problems. So that's how I would define it. Within that, something that can be helpful to see and to recognize is this leads to a view of humanity where we're all autonomous. There's no outside force or any outside creed or dogma or holy book that instructs us, even in what is truth necessarily. And that's where I say earlier that it's kind of this eye of the beholder kind of concept to it, right? Each human is fully autonomous with no other human having any authority to define it over another. But typically you'll find sort of this progressive, right? Humans helping humans. So sort of this progressive values vibe to it, right? Ethical development, social justice, altruism, humans helping humans, humility, environmentalism. Let's make the world a better place and all that jazz. So is that helpful, William, in kind of spelling that out a little bit for you?
Yeah, but okay. So then isn't like those books that are God saying do good things and stuff like that? It isn't like just you guys just going back to it, like just reformulating what's already there, but like in modern times, like it's just the same things that's happening that it was in the past, trying to figure things out, and those people wrote it that way. So right now you guys are trying to rewrite it some kind another, but speaking about the same thing. Like, could it be that?
Let me ask you, when you're saying those people writing those things, are you talking about whoever it is that wrote various religious scriptures, holy texts? Is that those people you're referring to? Yeah. Okay, good. So here's my thought there is each of us are going to be taking with us into our humanism, into just our understanding of ethics, right? We're going to be taking into it all kinds of whatever's in our background. So for people who are former Christians, for people who are former fundamentalist Christians, they'll bring in that former understanding. Not that necessarily that's their starting point for ethics, but maybe they had a strong reaction against something there. And so in their humanism, they're going to take a strong stance against how they were raised in this. For others, though, for maybe some Christians where it's a more progressive version of Christianity that wasn't so connected to the Bible or any particular writings, they're going to bring with it into their humanism, they're going to bring in their foundational understanding as well. Not necessarily pro or against, but nonetheless interacting with it, right? But not all humanists come from a post-Christian lens. Other humanists will come from maybe an Islamic lens, a Muslim lens, or maybe from a Hindu lens, or maybe they always grew up kind of more or less non-religious, secular, and they're just bringing in the different influences they've found through life. But what binds them all together is, regardless of your background, being able to take a step and say, as I look around at the world around me, maybe I'm reading some science, I'm exercising some critical thinking, maybe I'm interacting with the conversation with other people in community around me, and I'm just looking at, well, what makes sense? How do you not be a shitty person? Maybe one of my values is I don't want to be a shitty person because shitty people suck. Well, what does it mean to not be a shitty person? Again, it's kind of subjective, but that's the discussion. That's the dialogue. That's the beginning of our formulation, if you will, of our humanist values. Is that helpful, William? And I don't know, Dan, jump in. I don't want to take over the whole thing.
Yeah, go ahead, William. I want to hear your thoughts.
Okay. So, but my point is more like, isn't like humanist, that word? Is it like I feel like it's just a recap, like the same thing that the ancient were trying to say, like to help each other and stuff like that. But it's, I don't know.
Well, here's a big difference. Yeah. Here's a big difference, right? So let's talk about there's different ethical traditions in humanity, right? Let's talk specifically about Christianity, since we're talking a lot about Christianity, right? Where do ethics come from according to most Christians that you talk to? It comes from a God, right? And depending on the Christians you talk to, again, he may have specific commandments that he wants us to follow, either because they're good on their own or because God is good and therefore we have to follow his will. And humanism almost universally rejects this notion that ethics in itself, why we do the things that we do that are good, our reasoning for why we do the things is centered in any religious principles, in the sense that it comes from a God, or it comes from a holy book, or it comes from a preacher. You know, humanists tend to reject those at face value. They instead will proposition, well, maybe we should do the things that we want to do because this human being has feelings and I have feelings, and I know that if I did this thing, they would not feel good about this, and therefore I shouldn't be doing things. You know, like that's like a very basic way to water it down, but it's very profound if you really think about it. I mean, if we do have a morality that is external to us and objective, and that the world could access it, that would be one thing. But a lot of humanists don't actually think that's the case. A lot of humanists instead posit this idea that, look, these ideas of morality, ethics, like, they're very complex, but ultimately they come down to human desires and what humans want and what's best for people. And if we reject this idea that we have to even consider that we have to appeal to some sort of divine authority, then suddenly the way that we interact with each other does have a radical change, right? So there is criticisms as to humanism, as Drew was mentioning, it can be very hard to define. It can be very subjective, and people can have different interpretations of your view. And when you have different interpretations, suddenly, well, how do you come to a consensus? But every single ethical view that's ever been posited in the history of ever has had issues. I have yet to find a perfect one. So if somebody knows, let me know. But that's kind of the gist of the difference there, William.
I can answer you. I don't think it's particularly in one. It's like through all, but there's like a common thing between all of them that we can link together and make something. And I think like with humanism, it's like another attempt to do that, but like in modern time, and like it's like a new religion trying to making his own prophet and its own book.
Well, so whatever. There's a difference, though, William. Yeah, there's a difference between syncretism, which is the combining of other people's ideas and making it into one, and making claims of actually rejecting specific ideas and instead positing your own, right? Like, you see how there's a difference there. Like, we're not saying, oh, maybe there's a little bit of good stuff to Christianity, a little bit of good stuff to Islam, a little bit of good stuff like we're not even considering that. We're just saying the basis of human ethics comes from the interests of human beings. Like that's if you can define humanism in anything, I would say that's the most basic way you can define it. And that is a unique claim. Okay. That's not a syncretism. No. That's not taking stuff from other religions. No. That is a separate thing unto itself.
But
right?
Couldn't like there's religion come out of that line of reason thinking?
here's
Like how?
something
What
I
do you
would
mean?
suggest, William. So, yeah.
Yeah, what do you mean by religions come out of it? Can you explain? Because I don't know what you mean by that.
Well, like it's like we're still human and we have your consciousness, and we're still trying to figure it out, like through all time. And I see it like humanism is like another attempt at it, but it goes back to the same thing, to try to do good. And
Yes, I agree.
Let me ask
that
you this,
it's
William, if I may.
Yeah, go ahead, Drew.
Yeah,
take it.
William, when I know you've mentioned prophets a couple times and how, but yet also talking about how this sounds very much like kind of what we found with religions throughout. I mean, religion isn't I would suggest religion isn't necessarily defined as having to have a theistic element to it or a God's element to it. Do you see, when you say that this sounds religious or inevitably religious, what do you mean by that? Because humanism specifically, explicitly does not have prophets. It is incompatible with the idea of having a prophet or an official spokesperson. So how do you define religion?
Promoting it, talking about it, just it being there. It's, and people talking about it, wrestling with ideas and trying to search for answers and that, and try to see if it works. All that.
Well,
something's gonna. It's like a foundation for something else, and it's building up on it.
Yeah.
It's like all religion.
What I'm hearing here, William, and correct me if I'm wrong, jump in if I'm wrong. So when I asked you to define religion, you did not bring up anything that I think was even remotely close to the concept of a God or supernatural beings. It was humans in conversation with one another trying to advance humanity. And if that's how you define religion, then there is an offshoot, or some folks consider humanism to be a religion, but a non-theistic religion. So I participate in and am on the board for a congregational humanist community that is considered, that does have a religious exemption. So congregational humanism is a thing that can be considered religious, but it's non-theistic. There's no belief in gods. There's no prophet. So if you look, there's studies, we could talk another time. Ninian Smart. Oh, okay. Okay. Well, let me just say, Ninian Smart, he's this old school guy, this scholar who talks a lot about like the trends, religious trends, looking at around the world at various historical religious movements. And there's 7 different layers of what makes various religions. Only one of them is theistic or epistemological type things, belief components. And not all religious traditions have all 7 layers. It's very easy. And as you look at various segments of all the world's major religions have had different segments within them that have from time to time been non-theistic. There are Christian churches today that are explicitly atheistic. So yeah, you can be religious and also be atheist or non-theistic. At least I would suggest that. So from that lens, yeah, humanism can be religious, but again, no prophets, no official spokespersons. It's all about people helping people in community.
Well, it talks for itself. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we can talk about like how do you define the word religion? And if you're using the word to say, well, it's people, again, like Drew put it wonderfully, people in conversation and investigating to figure out what's true, then yeah, absolutely. Humanism could be counted as a religion. Okay. So what? Yeah, if you use the word broad enough, sure, that you can count all of science to be a religion. You can count people going to school to be a religion. I mean, like at some point the word stops becoming useful, but when humanists make their critique of religion, what they're really talking about is the sacred cows of religion. They're really talking about the things that are traditionally no-nos to talk about and no-nos to criticize, that a lot of communities aren't as willing to take a second look at and reconsider. And that's a big thing for a lot of humanists, is they saying, no, we should look at this. We shouldn't have sacred texts. We shouldn't have texts that can't be revised or remodeled. we shouldn't have particular
But
people that we have to take whose absolute word is gospel, right? So like there's some central tenets
it's
there to humanism that do make it distinct from other religions, if you still want to consider it a religion, but it is different. I mean, you can't say it's exactly the same, you know.
but it'll only go back to the same thing. Like some people gonna shine above some others, and they're gonna be like more like a prophet in quotes. Like more people gonna listen to them. Some gonna be brighter, so it's.
Okay.
I think it goes back.
But what's the problem with that?
I mean, when you define terms so broadly, a prophet
Yeah.
can be anybody who has a following. I mean,
You just described like wrestlers, like the World Wrestling Federation might as well be a religion, because there's some people that become really popular. And,
Reality.
well, okay, so if we're talking about truth claims about reality, so that's a bit different, because I don't know. Correct me if I'm wrong, Drew. You're more in the know with the humanist, communities. I don't know if humanists actually make truth claims about reality. I don't think they have a defined epistemic. I think they have recommendations. I think they should say you should use like science and reasoning maybe, but I don't think there's like an absolute defined like truth claim. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. Is that
when I hear truth claim, it's somebody standing up and saying, this is what reality is, period.
Yeah.
As opposed to that, there's a lot of humility in humanism, at least usually. I mean, you have some humanists who aren't very humble about anything.
Sure.
But generally speaking, though, I mean, it is considered a virtue or a value of a lot of humanists and of humanism to be humble in your stance. We don't know. We're open. To what science teaches us, to what experience teaches us, to what other humans and community teaches. We're very open to learning, generally speaking. So, I don't know that I've ever heard a humanist say, this is a truth claim. It is, period, especially something that they just made up. No.
Mm-hmm.
So humanism is it's like malleable. There's never going to be something concrete about it.
Humans?
I mean,
like
what's
humanity?
concrete is that we value humans. We value humanity, and we all want to work to see it progress. I mean, that's really what it is.
Yeah.
That's what's concrete. We all need to and want to survive, at least generally speaking, right? And so because of that, we're going to work together. So a lot of people describe humanism as a movement. Maybe that's helpful. There's lots of movements, things we get excited about. Humanism is, I would suggest humanism can be even more a lifestyle than a philosophy. I would define humanism more as a lifestyle than as a philosophy for me personally.
There you go. Well, I do appreciate having this conversation with you, and I definitely wish we could talk more. Unfortunately, we are at the end of the show here, and I do need to kind of wrap things up. So I am going to let you go. But if you do want to call in at a different time and maybe continue this or talk to other people, I'm sure some people in the live chat can tell you about it. It is an interesting concept, because it was hard for me to wrap my head around too, this whole humanist idea, because I think I had pretty similar thoughts where it's like, isn't this just kind of doing religion all over again? And in some ways, yes, because religion does have religious communities do have its positive aspects, right? Like having a sense of identity and having a sense of community and having a sense of life purpose, like is generally speaking good for people. Like it does help with people's emotional well-being, and humanism can lend itself to that. But humanism isn't a perfect life stance. It isn't a perfect philosophy, if you want to call it that, and I think humanists are going to be the first people to tell you that. Now, Frank, and here's another thing too: humanism might not vibe with you, and that's totally cool. If you want to use another label for yourself that you think more accurately describes, kind of what you're doing, that's totally valid. I have picked up the label for myself as sentientist. I like the sentientist label. I think it's kind of like humanist plus, because I think that humanists could take more animal ethics conversations into consideration that we always talk about. What about human values? And I'm like, what about sentient beings' values? What about people, beings that have thoughts and feelings that we can consider valuable there? So it's, humanism may not be perfect. It may not be what we all need at all times, but it can be a start for people who are deconstructing from a background of faith where their religious identity was all that they had, and they need something to fill in. They need something to kind of get there. And I'm not going to sell humanism short and say that's all it is either. There's a lot of great humanists that do a lot of awesome humanitarian work that talk about what the extent of this life stance or philosophy can get you, where it can take you. But it fulfills a lot of needs for a lot of people. So it is hard to define in a single instance or conversation. But hey, we are getting to the end of the show here. We got to start wrapping things up. But I need to thank Drew for being an awesome guest today. Drew Bekius, thank you so much for being on Truth Wanted today. Where can people find you if they want to see what you're doing?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, thanks for having me. Objectively, Dan. It was an objectively wonderful experience. So thank you for that. Where people can find me. So look for me on social, Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram. Instagram's maybe my favorite, but yeah. So all those things, it's all at Drew Bekius across the board for them. Also my website, drewbekius.com. Everything's just spelt my name as it is, nothing fancy. And you see my book right there in the middle. That's the main one anyway. And the whole purpose of that book, by the way, is to generate a greater dialogue, a conversation, foster a greater dialogue between those of faith and those without, where we take down the stereotypes between both sides and just generate healthy conversation. That's the goal of it. So yeah, check it out.
Very good. Very good. Well, thanks again for being on the show. I had personally a great time and love talking to you. And I like the calls that we had today. I want to remind folks just about some more ways you can help support this show and some more ways you can get involved in the community. So you may have noticed there's a little join button that's under the bottom of the video. If you're watching this on YouTube, that's how you can become a member. If you want to become a member, it's pretty simple. Just hitting that join button. And paying as little as 99 cents can get you to have those little emoticons in the chat. And it's just another way to show that, hey, you support the ACA and specifically Truth Wanted. And some of those emoticons include my face and some of the other hosts' face. So you can put those in chat now if you have them. I also want to talk about the Facebook group. I forgot to mention this last week, but we do have a Facebook fan group that you should definitely check out. It is pretty awesome. So I'm on there occasionally, and the other hosts are on there as well. If I don't respond on there, I definitely read all the stuff that comes in through there. So that's one way to talk to me and some of the other folks and just other people who are interested in this show and the topics that we generally discuss. If you want to talk to me, you can do that through the email. It's atheist-community.org. You can also follow me on Twitter. I'm there at ObjectivelyDan. So definitely check that out. Another thing I need to talk about is if you shop on Amazon, there's a way you can support the ACA as well at no cost to you. If you go to tiny.cc/Amazon Smile ACA, and you can designate the Atheist Community of Austin as your selected charity, and Amazon will donate a portion of their profit directly to the ACA whenever you do your shopping on there. So consider doing that if you want to still support us, but maybe not make a direct donation for some reason. That's a way you can do it. What else can I talk about? I need to also give a shout out to the wonderful, fantastic, amazing, spectacular crew that help make this show happen every single week. Look at that crew. That's we're a minimal crew today. Three is a small crew for us. Usually we got some more people.
They're working extra hard.
They're working extra hard. That's what it is. You can tell by the sweat on their brow that they are just making sure this audio sounds good, making sure this video is looking good. So thank you to the crew for doing that. And thanks again to everybody who likes this show on YouTube, who hits subscribe, or who listen to this on Spotify or wherever else you listen to your podcast. One more thing I need to point out: if you are a big podcast listener and you like this show and you want to listen to the other shows in podcast form, there is a YouTube channel for that for all of the Atheist Community of Austin's productions. It's at tiny.cc/AEN podcasts. So check that out if you have not already. That is a good place to go. And also, I need to give this a shout out as well. If you want to email the general community instead of just the show, we have another email that I need to start plugging here because I have not been doing it. It's tv@atheist-community.org. So if you have a question, but it's not just for me, it's for the ACA in general, that's how you should do it. Another thing I quickly, last thing, need to point out is the ACA's website. We have an updated website. A lot of people were talking about, man, look at this website. Who needs some work? Well, it's got some work done, and there's all kinds of updated policies and stuff on there and tells you more about the ACA in general. So I encourage you guys to look at the website. and check out what we're doing, because we're more than just shows. We do a lot of stuff as a nonprofit in helping the local Austin community and in helping other organizations as well commit to their goals. And I think that's everything that I needed to say. So, Drew, before we wrap up today's show, any words of wisdom you want to give to me, to the audience, to anybody?
You know, I think it's just take each day one day at a time, one step at a time. You're frustrated with whatever's fate. Maybe it's all, you know, stuff like we talked about with the first caller, fear of hell, or, you know, you're just frustrated with tendencies reverting back to things or beliefs or whatever. Be patient with yourself. Breathe deep. It's one step at a time. None of us are perfect.
Get that zen.
Take it in.
Breathing in. We just need to do one thing on here, or like in the middle of the episode, we just need to be like, all right, everybody take a break. We're just gonna breathe for like a minute. That's great podcast material. I think when your host just stop talking about the subject you're talking about, be like, all right, it's a breathing break time, and then just like audio silence.
Yes,
it's a good idea. I think
because we're only human.
That's right.
We're not gods. There are no gods. It's just humans, and that's us.
Ooh,
pretty amazing, but also pretty far from perfect.
Damn, what a tagline, Drew. What a way to end the show. And that's going to be it for this episode of Truth Wanted. Remember to always keep wanting the truth, and I'll see you next time.
Watch The Non-Prophets and join the hosts in the live chat, Sundays at 3 p.m. Central, between The Atheist Experience and Talk Hidden. Visit tiny.cc/YTNP.